When I was a younger man, I did some really stupid things for my marriage. You want to hear one? That's not very nice. So after our two kids were born, they get a little bit established and mom finally feels okay about leaving them alone. And we got to go on our first vacation after our kids were born, just the two of us. And I was so excited because it was our first vacation, just the two of us. And the closer it got to the vacation, the grumpier my wife got. And I was thinking to myself, woman, like I'm spending all this money to lavish on you a great experience, and you're acting like this? What's your problem? Now, do you think I actually said that out loud? I did, actually. I said to her, what's your problem? Now, for you young bucks, you're kind of newly married, let me just give you a word of wisdom from an older brother. If you ever say to the woman in your life, what's your problem? You have at least two problems. You just need to figure that out. So I said, what's your problem? And she goes, well, the problem is you've never written a will. We were in our 20s. Why would I need a will? I said, babe, we're going to Florida. You think we're going to die? And she goes, well, we could. I think, seriously. She said, if we died, do you realize our kids could be wards of the state of Missouri? I thought, that's ridiculous. And then I looked at the law, and it actually is a possibility. So I got with a lawyer friend, we got a will, and then we went on vacation. Why am I telling you this? Because sometimes you need to talk about things that you don't even want to think about. So today, we're going to talk about something you may not want to even think about. Not leaving your possessions to your children, but leaving a legacy for your children's children's children. That's what we need to talk about. And we're in the life of Joseph. This is the last in this series on the life of Joseph. And he really illustrates how to go through detours well. And the final detour in life, you know what it is? Spoiler alert, Joseph dies. Oh, you knew that already. Okay, so we're all gonna die. We know that, right? We know that we're all going to die. And the entire book of your life, every chapter from childhood to puberty to adulthood, every chapter is gonna be summarized with a tweet on a tombstone. But you get to write the tweet. And so I want to begin not in the life of Joseph, but with a tweet that was written about Joseph 2,000 years after he died. It's in the book of Hebrews in the New Testament. Here's what it says. By faith, Joseph, when his end was near, spoke about the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt and gave instructions concerning the burial of his bones. Now, when you read this word exodus, what do you think about? What do you think about? Charlton Heston, that's right. 10 Commandments, parting of the Red Sea, the Passover. That's what we think about. The big exodus when 2 million Jewish people were liberated by a man named Moses, who, by the way, looks a lot like Jesus. And if you told Joseph, look, Joseph, you're at the end of your life, what the exodus he was talking about was his bones. I don't want my bones to be buried in Egypt. I want my bones to go back to my homeland. And what Joseph was thinking about was just himself. But what his life resulted in was the liberation of 2 million Jews 400 years later. In fact, the book of Exodus itself opens with a nod to Joseph. It says in verse 8 of chapter 1, then a new king to whom Joseph meant nothing came to power in Egypt. You have no idea how much your life will matter to those children's children's children. In fact, it's even bigger than Moses. The first Christian martyr to die, his name was Stephen. It's recorded in the book of Acts chapter 8. As he's getting ready to be stoned by this angry mob, he preaches a sermon that goes through the entire history of Israel, which is probably a good thing to do when you're about to be stoned, just prolong the thing. He spends a lot of time on the life of Joseph, comparing Joseph to Jesus. Both of them had spent time in Egypt. Both of them were rejected by their brothers. Both of them went into a pit. For Joseph, it was the hole in the ground. For Jesus, it was hell itself. Both of them, by their sacrifice, saved their nation. Both of them represent salvation because of their own sacrifice. That's a big deal. So Stephen is describing the life of Jesus by comparing him to Joseph. Stephen is. But Jesus also talked about an Exodus that was even bigger than Moses's. Because of Jesus' sacrifice, he goes into the ground and then resurrects. And because he raised from the dead, at the end of time, when he returns, and he will, all those through all the world, through all of history, who claim the name of Jesus will be resurrected with Jesus, and that will be an exodus out of this world. We'll meet him in the air, and he will escort us to new heaven and a new earth. Now, if Joseph somehow could raise from the dead and be in the audience with you right now, his jaw would be on the floor at what I just said. He can't imagine the impact that his life is going to have, not just for generations, but for millennia. And the point for you today is, you have no idea. If you could raise from the dead 100 years from now, 200 years from now, the impact of your life can be absolutely extraordinary. And so if we're going to talk about what we don't want to think about, here's the first thing we need to talk about. Your life can have a long shelf life. I want to illustrate that by telling you a story of a friend of mine. His name is Mark, also. Is it Mark Hostetler? He was a student of mine at Ozark Christian College. When he came in, 18 years old, good-looking kid, like all the girls noticed him. And he was an entrepreneur. At 18, he already had a business that paid for his way through schooling. He never took out a loan. He never went into any debt for schooling. Stud of a kid. He wasn't like a super great student. He was okay. It was just because he had so many other interests, like he was a standout on the soccer field. Well-rounded young man. And when he graduated, he went to a very large church in Las Vegas, Nevada, to be a youth pastor. What I didn't know about Mark when he was 18 is what happened when he was 14. He and his identical twin brother Heath grew up in a very small town in Kansas. And in that town, the name Hostetler, it was a negative word. His dad had burned so many bridges, burned so many people, he'd made a lot of mistakes. And one of the mistakes was having an affair and then leaving his wife, and that left two kids, boys who were pubescent teens, in the care of a single mom, and they just went wild. They were breaking into people's houses, getting in trouble with the law, just skipping school. They were uncontrollable. So their mother had no choice but to give custody of her two twin boys to Cookson Hills, which was a group home for troubled teens. For the next 5 years, they grew up in Cookson Hills. And by the time Mark had come to me, I didn't see any of that trauma manifest in his life. Fast forward past his ministry, student ministry in Vegas, he stayed in Vegas and became a real estate agent. And every time I go to Vegas, I try to have a meal with Mark. He's now married, got 2 kids, wonderful family. But in 2005, he's a single guy making a lot of money in the real estate market. Because you remember the housing prices, 2005, through the roof. So we're at this meal, and there was another pastor at the table. He was in his 50s, had moved from Oklahoma to Vegas, and the housing prices were way different. So he's complaining, like, I can't even afford to buy a house here in Vegas. The chaos for him had become a crisis in his 50s. And Mark is sitting right next to me going, this chaos, it's not a crisis for me, it's a challenge. And I've risen to the challenge. I've made a lot of money because of this. 3 years later, 2008, anyone remember? The whole thing crashes. And I call Mark on the phone. I'm really concerned. I said, bro, how you doing? He goes, well, because of the housing crash, I've shifted my strategy, and I'm now one of the experts in the city on foreclosures. I've never made more money. And some of you have chaos right in front of you. If it's a crisis, it will hold you down. If it's a challenge, it will lift you up. But you get to decide the shelf life of your life based upon how you deal with the chaos that's right in front of us. And all of us have chaos in some way or another. All of us do. On every campus, online, wherever you are, there's some level of chaos. And how you look at that chaos will determine the length of your shelf life for your children's children's children. So here's a principle. We kind of need to live in this principle for just a little bit. Underdogs can be overachievers. You might think, well, I don't have the advantages that other people. I didn't have parents give me money. I didn't have a great education. I don't have a lot of natural skills. In one sense, it is an advantage to have an advantage. But in another sense, when you come from behind, the gains are greater. And let me show you a story from the life of Joseph from chapter 48. When Israel saw the sons of Joseph, by the way, Israel is Jacob. Jacob was his real name. Israel was his nickname given by God. And he's the one with the 12 sons, 12 tribes of Israel. Okay, so he had never met his grandsons. But when he immigrated from Israel to Egypt, because Joseph saved the family, he sees his grandsons and says, "Who are these?" And they are the sons God has given me here, Joseph said to his father. Then Israel said, "Bring them to me that I may bless them." And I got to pause here for a second because blessing for us is like someone sneezes and you say, "God bless you." It means nothing. But for a Jew, a blessing wasn't just a nice thing you say. It had actual reality. You could speak reality over someone that you had spiritual authority over. So he's going to bless his children. And by the way, the older son typically got a double blessing, what's called a double portion. And when the father was getting ready to die, he would divvy up the inheritance, and the oldest son would get twice as much as all of the other sons. It reminds me when my daughter was probably 7, 8 years old, we had a park right across the street from us. And I would let my son, he was 2 years older, I'd let my son go play at the park by himself. And my daughter was complaining. She said, "How come you let Josh do things that you don't let me do?" Well, I didn't think it was a question that deserved a reasonable answer. So I simply said, "Because I like him more." The fact that you're laughing indicates that you're Americans. Because the Jew would say, "Of course." Like the older son, he is your pride and joy. He is the strength of your loins. He gets a double portion. So with that in mind, this is what happened. When Jacob offered to bless his children, he is actually giving Joseph he's giving him the double portion because he's giving 2 blessings to each of his kids. So Joseph positions Ephraim and Manasseh. Manasseh was the oldest. He put Manasseh by his father's right hand, put Ephraim by his father's left hand. His dad is about dead. He's blind. He can't see anything. He crossed his hands. And his son said, Dad, no, you got it wrong. This is the older, this is the younger. And listen to what Jacob says. "I know, my son, I know. He too will become a people, and he too will become great. Nevertheless, his younger brother will be greater than he, and his descendants will become a group of nations." And then listen to the blessing. "In your name will Israel pronounce this blessing. May God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh." Not Manasseh and Ephraim, Ephraim and Manasseh. And here's what I want you to recognize today. This is un-American, but it's very biblical. Your words create worlds. They're not just sentiments. They're not just what you say. Your words have the power to create worlds. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. How? Genesis 1:3, God said, "Let there be light." Boom, there was light. God created with his words. And in the very same chapter, verse 26, God said, "Let us make mankind in our own image, male and female, he created them. You were made in the image of God. Therefore, you also create with your words. Now, I'm not saying that you can say, tree, boom, there's a tree. Here's what I am saying. And you know this down deep in your knower, that the words that were spoken over you became reality for you. Some of you right now have a scar down the center of your spiritual sternum because of one sentence that your father spoke. How could a son of mine be so stupid? You'll never amount to anything. Why are you such a screw up? Some of you, it's one sentence that your mother spoke. I don't know why I ever gave birth to you. You're sure getting fat. Why aren't you more like your sister? What I know as a parent is that some of the words that my children have remembered, I don't remember saying. Because what I said was not about them, it was about me. And some of the hardest things you have to bear, they weren't really about you. They were about your mother's fatigue or your father's frustration. But it doesn't change the fact that your words create worlds. And it's not just mom and dad. It can also be a mentor, a pastor, a parent, a coach, a teacher. If you have authority over someone or influence with someone, your words can create a world in them for the good and the bad. This is a silly illustration, but when I was a little kid, my dad put me in Little League, baseball. I wasn't that good, not at the beginning. Our team name literally was the Bears. And some of you are old enough to remember the movie, The Bad News Bears. It came out a few years after my team, but it was like a biographical sketch. We lost every single game the first year, everyone. And you know what my position was? Right field. It wasn't a compliment. They're just saying this is where he will do the least damage to the team. I can't prove this, but I think the coach actually chose all the kids with the least talent but a good heart because he knew that he could make something out of us. And over the years, he didn't just teach us how to throw and how to catch. He taught us our value as human beings. And it got into our heads. His words created a different world for us. And we kept that same team for, it was about 5 years. By year 3, we won the league. We were the best team in the league. And I personally had moved from right field to the pitcher's mound and shortstop. I don't even remember the guy's name. But I remember how he made me feel. Your words create worlds. And I want to point this out by digging deep into chapter 49. Because in chapter 49, Jacob is going to give a blessing to all of his sons, all 12 of his sons. And it's interesting, as you look at what he said, everything that Jacob said was true. But not everything he said became reality. Because anytime there's a voice in your life, for good or for bad, anytime there's a voice in your life, there's always 3 voices in the room. There's the mentor's voice, the parent, the teacher, the coach, the pastor. And that voice has immense power over you to create a world. But it is not definitive because you also have a voice. And God also has a voice. You can't control what other people say to you or about you. You can, however, control the volume of their voice. I'm going to tell you in a minute how to control that volume, but let's look at the 3 voices. Voice number 1 is the voice of a father. He said to his oldest son in verse 3, Reuben, you were my firstborn, my might, the first sign of my strength, excelling in honor and excelling in power. It's good news, right? Reuben, my oldest son. But look at the next verse. Turbulent as the waters, you will no longer excel, for you went up onto your father's bed, onto my couch, and defiled it. And he had. He's referring back to a very ugly incident when Reuben had sex with his father's concubine, Bilhah. Now, that's all kind of messed up. We don't even want to go there. But some of you have been there, where you made a mistake and it was a devastating mistake, and it cut ties with one of your mentors or one of your dear friends or maybe a spouse, and you live in that space. If you fast forward to the history of Israel, the tribe of Reuben never amounted to anything. The Father's words, as ugly as they are, as difficult as they are, his words created a world. And some of you are living in that world of a parent or teacher, a mentor. You don't have to live in that world. See, Joseph had as many negative voices as Reuben ever had. He could have listened to the words of his father when he shared the dream, and his dad says, don't, you're getting a little too big for your britches. Joseph, don't talk like that. He had a dream, a vision from God, and his dad said no. But Joseph still said yes. He turned the volume down on his father's voice. He could have listened to his brother's voice that sold him into slavery. You aren't worthy to be part of this family. He could have turned the volume up, but he didn't. He turned it down. He could have listened to Potiphar's wife, who falsely accused him of rape. He could have turned the volume up on her and said, well, I didn't rape her, but what did I do wrong? Surely I'm part of the problem. But he turned it down. He could have turned the volume up on Potiphar, who threw him into prison, knowing he was innocent. Any of you ever been done wrong when you were innocent? Cheated, lied to? Sure, we all have. You can either turn the volume up or turn the volume down. That's your choice. He chose to turn the volume up, not on the others' voices, but on his own voice. And in every crisis, whenever there's chaos, it can either become a crisis that holds you down or a challenge that lifts you up, and that's what he chose. To illustrate this, I want to remind you of Ephraim and Manasseh, the two sons of Joseph. Remember the crossed hands? If you look in the history of Israel, the tribe of Manasseh actually was way more important than the tribe of Ephraim. What Jacob spoke was true, but it didn't become reality because Manasseh said, I have a voice in this. I can change the chaos from a crisis to a challenge, and he did. Fast forward 400 years, the tribe of Israel enters the promised land, and Manasseh is given a beautiful piece of ground. It was on the west side of the river Jordan, but there was another on the east side. It was good land, but a lot of enemies. A lot of challenges. None of the tribes wanted that area. And Manasseh said, we'll take it, but you already have an area. I know, we'll take this too. We'll take the other area. And they went and they conquered it, and they pushed out the enemies, and they established themselves as the only tribe. You could fact check me. Look at a map of the 12 tribes of Israel. Manasseh is the only tribe with 2 territories because they chose it. And if you look at the census data, from when they entered the promised land to when they established the promised land, no tribe grew more than Manasseh. You are not destined to the voices that have been spoken into you. That father, that coach, either good or bad. Sometimes there's a good word spoken over you and you can make some mistakes to destroy it. Or an evil was spoken over you, a curse was spoken over you, and you can turn your chaos into a challenge, not a crisis. That volume knob is in your control. Let me tell you in just a minute how to control that volume knob. The third voice is God's. God said in verse 10, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he to whom it belongs shall come, and the obedience of the nations shall be his. You know who this is talking about, right? This is a prophecy of Jesus Christ coming from the tribe of Judah. Now that was unlikely. If you go back and read the life of Judah, he made some dumb mistakes. Judah, when they got into the land, married a foreign woman who worshiped other gods. And the 3 sons of Judah, they were a mess. So the oldest marries a young woman named Tamar. And because he was evil, he died. And this sounds weird, I know, but in Jewish culture, if a woman was a childless widow, it was the next brother's responsibility to go and have sex with her to provide an heir for her old age. That was her social security. So the next son's name was Er, and he was in error. This guy was bad. Like, I'm not even gonna tell you what he did, but let's just say he availed himself of sex without providing her an offspring. Enough said. It's ugly. And God destroyed him. God took him out. So now there's one son left. And so he's supposed to go provide Tamar an heir. But Judah would not allow that to happen. Would you? She's like a black widow or something, like, my only son left. But so here she is, a widow, trapped in her father-in-law's house with no options for old age. So she took matters into her own hands. She dressed up like a prostitute, covered her face with a veil, and positioned herself where she could seduce her father-in-law. She was successful. He gave her his staff as surety to come back and give payment. She just took the staff and hid it away and ran. Well, about 5-6 months later, you know what happens. And the family's going, Tamar, like, she's a wicked woman. And he said, Tamar, you're a wicked woman. And she goes, yeah, and you're the dad. You know what Judah did? He repented. Instead of making excuses, he took responsibility, said, you're right. You're more righteous than I am. And he took care of Tamar and that child. And that set a trajectory in his life so that he became sacrificial. In fact, in the story of Joseph, you might recall when the brothers came back for more food. They're starving. Times are tough. They were forced to bring their youngest son, Benjamin, the apple of their aged father's eye. And Jacob said, if anything happens to Benjamin, that will destroy me. Well, Joseph sees it's his full-blood brother. It's the only full-blood brother he had. He had his servants put a cup in Benjamin's sack and then accuse him, look, you stole it. Ashley talked about this last week. And it was Judah who said, you cannot punish Benjamin because that will destroy my father. Take me instead. Judah laid down his own life so that Benjamin could have a life. And because that is Christ-like, God at that moment determined he is the Son through whom the Savior would come. There's always three voices: the voice of the mentor, your voice, and God's voice. And if you want to turn up the volume on your voice or on God's voice, it begins not with your name, but with the name of Jesus Christ, allowing him to restore your name. On all our campuses this weekend, we're having baptisms. And if you're in a place where you desperately want to turn up the volume on God's voice in your life and turn down the volume of others, this is step one: to be buried symbolically in a grave of water, like Jesus, where you die to yourself, and then when you're raised, you accept the resurrection of Jesus to give you a new life. That's the first step in changing the volume. But if you're gonna leave a legacy to your children's children's children, it begins with giving Jesus lordship of your life. But it will depend on how you answer this one simple question: what can God do through you because of what others have done to you? Think about that. I'm not saying that God caused the pain in your life, but God can use the pain in your life. And he can take the chaos and move it from a crisis that holds you down to a challenge that lifts you up. But it will require this. It will require that you view the pain of your past the way Joseph did. The last thing we read from Joseph, his father's died, and his brothers are certain that now that dad is gone, the wrath of Joseph is going to come out. He's going to destroy us. If this is you, then you can leave a legacy to your children's children's children. Listen to what Joseph said. Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So then don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your children. Are you looking back at the past pain? Or are you looking forward to the opportunity? My friend Mark Hostettler, what drove him to success the whole time is he wanted to change his name from a curse in a small town in Kansas to a blessing to his children's children's children. And he's doing that, and so can you. But you have to turn the knobs so that the voices of pain in your past get muted and the voice of God gets elevated. I was talking to a woman last night about this, and she just said, man, I know that's true, but I just don't know how to turn the knobs. I don't know how to elevate the voice. It's simple. It really is simple. Not easy, but it's simple. If you want to mute the voices of your past, then you elevate the voice for your future. There is one person for every person, right now there's one person for every person that your voice could matter to them. And the more you speak life to the future, the more silent the voices of your past will become. And so I just want to challenge everyone online, on every campus. There's one person this week that you need to speak life into, because you have no clue how long a shelf life your life can have. Let's pray. Holy Father, we want to hear your voice. We want your voice to be elevated, to dominate our thinking, our hopes, and our dreams. We trust you that you can take the chaos that we're in the middle of right now, and that it becomes a challenge for us to live a life that is extraordinary, impactful, beyond what we could even fathom. Well, for all of those hearing my voice now, would you elevate the positive voices in their life and mute the negative voices through their voice being used to build someone else up? We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Let's go out and make Jesus famous.